In ancient Egypt, beneath the shadow of the Great Pyramids, lived a soldier who stood head and shoulders above all other men. Kamwaset was his name, and his massive frame struck fear into the hearts of enemies and allies alike. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could shake temple walls, he was Egypt's most formidable warrior. Yet for all his strength in battle, he was powerless against the whispers that followed him through Memphis streets. Beast, they called him. Monster. No woman would accept his courtship, no family would offer their daughter's hand. Kamwaset had accepted his fate as a man destined for war, but never for love. Until the day a potter's daughter named Neferet looked past his towering shadow and saw something no one else had noticed. But could their forbidden love survive the jealousy and traditions that threatened to tear them apart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bronze Kopish sword hung at Kamwaset's side like a crescent moon made of metal, its blade twice the length of any weapon carried by his fellow soldiers, forged specially for his massive hands. It had tasted the blood of Nubian raiders and Syrian rebels, earning him the respect that his appearance alone could never command. Yet as he polished its surface in the pre-dawn darkness of the Memphis barracks, Kamwaset wondered if respect born of fear was worth having at all. The other soldiers gave him wide berth as he prepared for the morning drills, not from hatred, but from an instinctive weariness that even brotherhood in arms could not entirely overcome. They spoke to him when duty required, showed him the deference his rank demanded, but never invited him to share their evening meals or listen to their stories of hope. He was their weapon, their shield against the empire's enemies, but never their friend. Captain Amenemheb approached with the day's orders, his weathered face bearing the scars of 20 campaigns. Unlike the younger men, he had served long enough to see past Kamwaset's intimidating exterior to the disciplined soldier beneath. The pharaoh requests a demonstration for the Nubian ambassadors today, Amenemheb said quietly. Show them why Egypt's borders remain secure. Kamwaset nodded, understanding the unspoken message. He was to be displayed like a prized bull, his size and strength serving as a warning to potential enemies. It was a role he had played countless times, standing silent and imposing while diplomats negotiated treaties and trade agreements. The morning sun climbed higher as the regiment assembled in the great courtyard of the Memphis garrison. Kamwaset took his position at the front, his shadow falling across 3 of his fellow soldiers like a giant sundial marking time. The Nubian delegation arrived in colorful robes and elaborate addresses, their dark faces betraying nothing as they observed Egypt's military might. But it was not the ambassador's attention that troubled Kamwaset. In the crowd of onlookers gathered to witness the demonstration stood the families of his fellow soldiers, wives clutching children, mothers beaming with pride at their warrior sons. His own eyes searched automatically for a face that would never be there, for the family he had long accepted he would never have. The demonstration began with formation marching, the soldiers moving in perfect synchronization across the sand-covered courtyard. Kamwaset's massive form dominated the display, his bronze kopsh catching the sunlight like a beacon. The Nubians whispered among themselves, no doubt calculating how many of their own warriors it would take to bring down this giant. Next came individual combat displays. Kamwaset faced 3 opponents simultaneously, his enormous reach and strength allowing him to hold them at bay while barely exerting himself. The kopsh moved in great sweeping arcs, its bronze surface gleaming as it traced patterns in the air. To the watching crowd, it appeared effortless, almost graceful despite his size. But Kamwaset felt no joy in these displays of dominance. Each victory reminded him of his isolation, each demonstration of his prowess, another barrier between himself and the simple human connections he craved. The very strength that made him valuable as a soldier made him terrifying as a man. After the formal demonstrations ended, the soldiers were dismissed to their evening meal. Camusot retreated to his private quarters, a small room barely large enough to accommodate his frame. The walls were bare except for his weapons and armor, lacking the personal touches that decorated his comrades' spaces. No letters from family, no small treasures from home, no reminders of life beyond military service. He removed his armor piece by piece, each bronze plate carefully cleaned and placed in its designated position. The ritual brought him a measure of peace, the familiar routine helping to quiet the loneliness that gnawed at him like hunger. From a small wooden box, he withdrew his most precious possession, not a weapon or military decoration, but a tiny carved bird no longer than his thumb. He had whittled it during a long siege 3 years past, his massive fingers working with surprising delicacy to shape the soft wood. It was a swallow, symbol of home and return, though Camwasset had no home to return to, beyond these barracks walls. Still he found comfort in its simple form, in the proof that his hands could create beauty as well as destruction. Outside his window, the sounds of Memphis at evening drifted through the warm air. Merchants closing their shops, children playing in the streets, families gathering for their evening meals. Normal sounds of normal lives, as foreign to Camwasset as the languages of distant lands. The clay vessel took shape beneath Neferet's careful hands, the potter's wheel spinning steadily as she coaxed beauty from the simple earth. The lotus design emerged gradually under her practiced fingers, each petal carved with the precision that had made her family's pottery sought after throughout Memphis. The morning light filtering through the workshop's reed curtains illuminated the vessel's smooth surface, revealing the delicate artistry that transformed common clay into something precious. Her father, Ketty, watched from his bench, where he painted the finished pieces with vibrant pigments. Though his hair had turned silver and his hands trembled slightly with age, his artistic eye remained sharp. He had taught Neferet everything about their craft, from selecting the finest clay from the Nile's banks to firing the vessels in their ancient kiln. "The lotus blooms eternal," he murmured, admiring her work. "Like the kindness in your heart, my daughter." Neferet smiled at the familiar saying. Her father often spoke in such gentle philosophies, finding deeper meaning in their simple craft. To him, pottery was not merely commerce but meditation, each vessel a prayer shaped in clay and blessed by fire. The workshop occupied the ground floor of their modest house in Memphis's artisan quarter, where the air perpetually carried the mingled scents of wet clay, wood smoke, and the exotic spices from nearby markets. Their neighbors were fellow craftsmen, weavers, metal workers, carpenters, honest folk who took pride in the work of their hands and measured wealth, not in gold, but in the respect of their community. Neferet's younger brother Seneb burst through the doorway, his 10-year-old energy barely contained by their small space. Clay dust covered his tunic from helping load the morning's delivery cart, and his grin revealed a gap where he had recently lost a tooth. "The merchant from Thebes wants 20 more jars by next week," he announced breathlessly. "He says our pottery is the finest he's ever seen." Ketty nodded approvingly, but Neferet noticed the slight wince that crossed his features. The increased orders meant more work for hands that grew stiffer each season, more strain on eyes that tired more easily. At 19, she had gradually assumed more responsibility for their family's livelihood, though she never spoke of her father's declining strength. "We shall manage," she said gently, already calculating how to reorganize their work to meet the deadline. "Perhaps young Seneb here can help mix the clay." The boy's face lit up at the prospect of greater responsibility. Since their mother's death 3 years past, Seneb had tried to fill the role of man of the house, despite his tender age, taking on tasks far beyond his years with determined seriousness. The morning progressed in comfortable routine, each family member absorbed in their particular skills. Neferet shaped vessel after vessel, her movements flowing with the practiced grace of years spent at the potter's wheel. The clay seemed to respond to her touch, like a living thing, taking form under her gentle guidance. Yet today, for reasons she could not name, her mind wandered beyond the familiar confines of their workshop. Through the reed curtains, she glimpsed the bustling life of Memphis, Merchants hawking their wares, children playing in dusty alleyways, soldiers marching to their duties. The city pulsed with energy and possibility, while she remained bound to this small space by duty and tradition. Not that she resented her life. The pottery brought her genuine satisfaction, and caring for her family filled her heart with purpose. But sometimes, in quiet moments like these, she wondered what lay beyond the narrow streets of the artisan quarter, what adventures awaited in the wider world. A group of young women passed by their doorway, chattering excitedly about the upcoming harvest festival. Neferet recognized several from the temple ceremonies. Daughters of merchants and minor officials, adorned with jewelry that caught the sunlight like captured stars. They paused briefly at the workshop entrance, admiring the displayed pottery with the casual interest of those who could afford such luxuries without concern for cost. "Such lovely work," one commented, her voice carrying the refined accent of the upper quarters. "Though I suppose it must be terribly boring, doing the same thing every day." The group moved on without waiting for response, their laughter fading as they continued toward the market. Neferet returned to her wheel, but their careless words lingered like smoke. Did her life appear so narrow from the outside, so predictable and small? "Pay them no mind," Ketty said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "They see only the surface of things. True satisfaction comes not from novelty, but from mastery, not from excitement, but from purpose." His wisdom rang true, yet Neferet found herself gazing toward the doorway long after the young women had disappeared. Somewhere beyond these familiar walls lived people whose days held mystery and change, whose futures stretched unmarked by predetermined path. The papyrus marriage contract lay spread across the scribe's table, like a map of predetermined destiny. Kermesset studied its formal hieroglyphs with growing unease, each symbol a reminder of the gulf between his military world and the civilian life that remained forever beyond his reach. The document detailed the standard arrangements for Egyptian marriages, property rights, inheritance provisions, obligations of both families, but assumed a social foundation he simply did not possess. "The regulations are quite clear," explained Scribe Heminu, his reed pen poised above a fresh sheet of papyrus. "A soldier of your rank requires family connections of appropriate standing. The bride's father must demonstrate sufficient resources to maintain household dignity befitting your position." Outside the administrative building, Memphis hummed with its usual morning activity. Merchants arranged their wares in the great marketplace, their voices calling out prices and quality claims that echoed off the limestone walls of nearby temples. Children darted between the stalls, chasing each other in games as old as the city itself, while their mothers negotiated purchases with the practiced shrewdness of experienced household managers. Meanwhile, in the artisan quarter, Neferet arranged her family's finest pottery for transport to the weekly market. Each piece represented hours of careful work, the shaping, drying, painting, and firing that transformed humble clay into objects of beauty and utility. Her father had taught her to see each vessel as a small miracle, proof that patient hands could create lasting beauty from the most common materials. The contrast between their morning routines revealed the vast social distance that separated their worlds. Kermesset moved through spaces designed for power and authority, military compounds, administrative buildings, the grand temples where royal ceremonies took place. His concerns centered on matters of empire and warfare, his duties extending far beyond Memphis to the distant borders where Egypt's enemies tested the kingdom's strength. Neferet's world was smaller, but no less meaningful. Her responsibilities centered on family and community, the intimate networks of mutual support that sustained daily life in the artisan quarter. She knew the names of her neighbors' children, remembered which families struggled with illness or poverty, celebrated the small triumphs that marked the passage of ordinary lives. Yet both found themselves restless on this particular morning. though neither could have explained why. Camset dismissed the scribe's explanations with unusual curtness, his mind wandering to thoughts of the simple human connections that seemed to elude him despite his elevated military status. The marriage contract's requirements only emphasized his isolation. What family would align themselves with a man whose very presence intimidated potential allies? As he walked through Memphis streets toward the garrison, Camset noticed details that usually escaped his attention. A young mother teaching her daughter to weave baskets, their heads bent together in concentration. An elderly couple sharing bread outside their modest home, comfortable in the silence that comes from decades of companionship. These glimpses of ordinary happiness seemed to mock his own solitary existence. Neferet loaded the delivery cart with equal distraction, her usual pleasure in the morning's work dampened by restlessness she could not name. The pottery felt heavier today, each piece a reminder of the endless cycle that defined her days, creating, selling, creating again. When had routine become repetition? When had the satisfaction of skilled work become the monotony of predetermined purpose? Her brother Sanib noticed her unusual quietness as they prepared to depart for the market. "Are you feeling well, sister? You seem troubled." "Just tired," she replied, though they both knew this was not entirely true. The weariness she felt went deeper than physical exhaustion, touching something fundamental about the direction of her life. The morning sun climbed higher as both Camset and Neferet moved through their separate routines, unaware that their paths would soon intersect in ways that would transform both their futures. He marched toward another day of military exercises and strategic planning, while she guided their loaded cart toward the marketplace, where their family's pottery would find new homes. The social barriers that separated their worlds seemed as fixed as the pyramids themselves, ancient, massive, immovable. Egyptian society had functioned for centuries on the principle of fixed roles and predetermined relationships. Soldiers married within military families, artisans allied with other craftspeople, and the great wheel of social order turned without deviation or surprise. Neither Camset nor Neferet questioned these fundamental arrangements directly. They had been raised to accept their positions in the great hierarchy that stretched from Pharaoh's palace to the humblest farmer's hut. Yet both felt the stirring of something deeper than social conditioning, the human heart's stubborn insistence that true connection transcends artificial boundaries. The broken water jar lay in pieces across the dusty marketplace stones, its painted lotus design now scattered fragments that caught the afternoon sunlight like fallen petals. Neferet stared at the destruction in dismay, her heart sinking as she calculated the loss, not just the vessel itself, but the water it had carried for their family's evening meal, now seeping uselessly into the packed earth. She had been hurrying through the crowded market, balancing the heavy jar on her hip while navigating between merchants' stalls and wandering livestock. The delivery to the wealthy merchant's house had taken longer than expected, and shadows were already lengthening toward evening. Her mind had been focused on reaching home before her father began to worry, when suddenly she collided with what felt like a living wall. The impact sent her stumbling backward, the precious jar flying from her grasp to shatter against the ground with a sound like breaking thunder. For a moment she could only stare at the destruction, her mind struggling to process what had happened. "Forgive me." The voice that spoke was deep as a temple drum, yet surprisingly gentle. "I was not watching where I walked." Neferet looked up to find herself gazing at the largest man she had ever seen. He towered above her like a monument, his shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, his arms thick as the cedar pillars that supported the great temple. This could only be the legendary giant soldier she had heard whispered about in market gossip. Camset, the Colossus of Memphis, fear of Egypt's enemies. Her first instinct was to flee. Everything about him should have terrified her. His massive size, the bronze khopesh at his side, the way other people in the market had suddenly stepped back to create a wide circle around them. Yet something in his expression gave her pause. Instead of the brutal arrogance she expected from such a fearsome warrior, she saw genuine distress in his dark eyes. The fault was mine, she heard herself saying, surprised by her own boldness. I was not watching my path either. Kamwaset knelt beside the broken pottery, his movements careful and precise despite his enormous frame. His massive hands, which she knew could wield weapons that other men could barely lift, now gently gathered the scattered fragments with the delicacy of a temple priest handling sacred offerings. This was beautiful work, he said quietly, examining the painted lotus design on one of the larger pieces. The artistry is exceptional. Neferet blinked in surprise. She had not expected this giant warrior to notice, much less appreciate, the aesthetic qualities of her family's pottery. You understand craftsmanship? A shadow of what might have been sadness crossed his features. I understand the patience required to create beauty, and I understand the pain of seeing it destroyed. Around them, the marketplace had grown unusually quiet. Merchants paused in their haggling. Children stopped their games, and even the animals seemed to sense the unusual nature of this encounter. The legendary giant soldier, terror of battlefields from Nubia to Syria, was kneeling in the dust to help a potter's daughter collect fragments of broken pottery. Let me replace what I have destroyed, Kamwaset said, beginning to rise to his full intimidating height. I will pay whatever the vessel was worth, and for the water as well. That is not necessary, Neferet replied quickly, though her family could ill afford the loss. Something about his genuine remorse touched her heart in a way she did not fully understand. Accidents happen. The clay can be reformed, the design recreated. Kamwaset studied her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow was not. You are kind to excuse my clumsiness. Not many would show such understanding to a stranger who had cost them both time and money. Perhaps because you are not truly a stranger, Neferet said, the words emerging before she could consider their wisdom. Your reputation precedes you, Kamwaset of Memphis. Though I confess the stories did not mention your courtesy. His expression grew guarded, as if her recognition had reminded him of barriers he had momentarily forgotten. The stories rarely mention such things about soldiers. The crowd around them had begun to whisper among themselves, their voices carrying mixtures of amazement and disapproval. A potter's daughter speaking so freely with the giant warrior, what could such an encounter mean? The social impropriety of their conversation was becoming more apparent with each passing moment, yet neither seemed willing to end the exchange. For Kamwaset, this was the first conversation in years where someone had looked at him without fear or calculation, seeing him simply as a man rather than a weapon. For Neferet, the gentle courtesy he showed, despite his fearsome reputation, challenged everything she had assumed about the vast gulf between their worlds. The copper mirror reflected more than Neferet's physical features as she prepared for sleep that evening. In its polished surface, she saw the confusion that had plagued her thoughts since the marketplace encounter. Her hands moved automatically through the ritual of braiding her hair, but her mind remained fixed on the unexpected gentleness she had witnessed in the giant soldier's dark eye. Her father noticed her distraction immediately when she returned home with the tragic news of the broken jar and no water for their evening meal. Keti listened to her carefully edited account of the accident without comment, though his weathered face showed concern that went beyond the practical loss they had suffered. This soldier, he said quietly as they shared their modest supper of bread and dried fruit. Did he threaten you in any way? No, father. He was courteous. More than courteous, he was gentle. The words felt strange on her tongue, as if she were describing someone entirely different from the fearsome warrior of Memphis legend. Seneb, her younger brother, looked up from his meal with wide eyes. You spoke with Kamwaset the giant? The one who can defeat 10 men single-handed. Where did you hear such stories? Neferet asked, though she already knew. The marketplace buzzed constantly with tales of the legendary soldier's battlefield prowess, each retelling more dramatic than the last. Everyone knows about him, Seneb replied with the authority of youth. They say he's as tall as the temple pillars and stronger than the sacred bulls, but they also say no woman will marry him because he's too frightening to look upon. Keti's expression grew more troubled at this revelation. Perhaps it would be wise to avoid the marketplace for a few days, daughter. Such encounters, however innocent, can lead to unwanted complications, but Nefret found herself unable to dismiss the memory so easily. Throughout the evening, as she helped clean their workshop and prepare clay for the next day's work, her thoughts returned repeatedly to those moments in the marketplace. The careful way Camozit had gathered the pottery fragments, the genuine sorrow in his voice when he apologized, the loneliness she had glimpsed beneath his fearsome exterior. Meanwhile, in the military quarters across the city, Camozit faced his own struggle with the afternoon's unexpected encounter. He sat on his simple bed, still wearing his bronze armor, despite the late hour, staring at his massive hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Captain Amenemheb had noticed his distraction during the evening meal, the way his mind seemed elsewhere during their discussion of tomorrow's training exercises. When directly questioned, Camozit had offered only vague excuses about fatigue from the day's duties, but his superior's experienced eye detected deeper currents. "Trouble with the men?" Amenemheb asked, settling his weathered frame on a nearby stool. "No, Captain, they perform their duties adequately. Problems with the Nubian border situation?" The reports suggest continued calm in that region. Amenemheb studied his giant subordinate with the patience of a commander who had learned to read men's hearts as well as their action. "Then perhaps the trouble lies elsewhere. A soldier's mind should be clear for battle. Camozet, whatever disturbs your thoughts, resolve it quickly." After his captain's departure, Camozet finally removed his armor and prepared for sleep, but rest eluded him as thoroughly as it had eluded Neferet. He found himself replaying every moment of their brief encounter, remembering the way she had looked at him without fear, spoken to him without calculation. In all his years of military service, he had grown accustomed to the way people responded to his presence. Enemies fled or fought desperately. Allies showed nervous respect, mixed with relief that he served their cause rather than opposing it. Citizens of Memphis stepped aside when he passed, their faces betraying mixtures of pride and unease at his proximity. But the potter's daughter had looked at him with simple human recognition, as if his size and reputation were secondary to the man beneath. When had anyone last spoken to him so naturally? When had anyone shown him kindness that expected nothing in return? The questions tormented him through the long hours of night, accompanied by others, even more dangerous to contemplate. What was her name? Did she have family who depended on her? What dreams occupied her thoughts during the quiet hours of her craft? Such wonderings were folly, he knew. The social barriers between them were as absolute as the walls that protected Memphis from its enemies. A royal soldier and a potter's daughter inhabited different worlds, governed by different expectations, bound by different duties. Their brief encounter had been an accident of circumstance, nothing more. Yet as dawn approached and sleep continued to elude him, Camozet found himself planning his next visit to the marketplace with more care than he had ever devoted to any military campaign. The carved wooden bird took shape slowly beneath Camozet's massive fingers, each careful stroke of his knife revealing delicate feathers and graceful curves from the simple piece of cedar. He worked during the quiet evening hours when his duties were complete, his hands moving with surprising gentleness despite their size and strength. The tiny swallow seemed almost alive in his palm, its wings spread as if ready to take flight toward freedom. For 3 days now he had found excuses to walk through Memphis's marketplace during his off-duty hours. Not searching, he told himself, merely observing the city's rhythms as any responsible soldier should. Yet his eyes inevitably sought one particular face among the crowds of merchants and shoppers, hoping for another glimpse of the potter's daughter, who had spoken to him without fear. The other soldiers had begun to notice his changed behavior. During weapons practice, his concentration seemed divided. At evening meals, he participated less in their rough conversations about battles and women and wine. Captain Amenemheb watched him with growing concern, though he said nothing directly about the subtle transformation. On the 4th day, fortune granted Camozet his wish. He spotted Neferet near the pottery merchant's stall, carefully examining a set of painted bowls while her younger brother arranged their family's wares for display. She wore a simple linen dress the color of desert sand, her dark hair braided with small blue beads that caught the afternoon light. Their eyes met across the busy marketplace, and for a moment the noise of haggling merchants and crying children seemed to fade into silence. She smiled, not the nervous grimace he usually inspired in civilians, but a genuine expression of recognition that made something tight in his chest suddenly relax. Cammerset approached slowly, mindful of the attention his presence always drew. Other shoppers stepped aside automatically, creating a path through the crowd that felt more like reverence than courtesy. He stopped at a respectful distance, close enough to speak, but far enough to avoid seeming threatening. "Good afternoon," he said quietly. "I hope your family suffered no lasting inconvenience from our unfortunate encounter." "None at all," Nefert replied, though her voice carried a slight tremor that suggested nervousness. "The jar has been replaced, and the water as well. Thank you for your concern." Her brother Sineb stared up at Cammerset with undisguised awe, his young mouth hanging open as he absorbed every detail of the legendary giant's appearance. The boy seemed torn between terror and fascination, edging closer to his sister while unable to look away from their unexpected visitor. "Your pottery is exceptional," Cammerset continued, gesturing toward the displayed vessels. "The craftsmanship shows true mastery of the art." "My father has practiced his craft for 30 years, Nefert said with evident pride. "He learned from his father, who learned from his father before him. The techniques pass from generation to generation, each adding their own understanding. Like military training," Cammerset observed, "knowledge builds upon itself, creating strength through continuity." The comparison seemed to surprise her, as if she had not expected such philosophical insight from a warrior. Their conversation continued in careful, formal phrases, but beneath the proper words lay currents of genuine interest that both recognized and neither dared acknowledge openly. Other shoppers began to gather at the edges of their vision, drawn by curiosity about this unprecedented exchange between the giant soldier and the artisan family. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grain, carrying speculation and surprise throughout the marketplace. Sensing the growing attention, Cammerset prepared to withdraw. "I should not keep you from your business. May the gods grant you prosperity in your endeavors." But as he turned to leave, young Seneb's voice stopped him. "Sir, are you truly as strong as they say? Can you really lift a horse above your head?" "Seneb," Nefert scolded, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment at her brother's boldness. Yet Cammerset smiled, the first genuine smile he had worn in months. "I have never tried to lift a horse, young man, but I suspect the horse would object strenuously to such treatment." The boy giggled at this unexpected humor, his fear evaporating in the face of the giant's gentle response. Even Nefert relaxed slightly, seeing how naturally Cammerset adapted his manner to put a child at ease. "Perhaps," Cammerset continued, reaching into his belt pouch, "you would accept a small gift." He withdrew the carved wooden swallow and offered it to Seneb. "I made this during quiet hours. It seems fitting that it should belong to someone young enough to still believe in flight." The boy accepted the carving with reverent care, his eyes wide with wonder at receiving such an unexpected treasure. Nefert watched the exchange with growing amazement, seeing yet another layer of gentleness beneath the warrior's fearsome exterior. The blue lotus flower floated in the temple's sacred pool like a fragment of sky that had fallen to earth. Nefert knelt beside the water's edge, her reflection wavering alongside the perfect bloom as she gathered courage for what she was about to do. The Festival of Thoth had drawn most of Memphis to the great temple complex, providing the cover she needed for this dangerous meeting. 3 days had passed since Cammerset's gift to her brother, 3 days of careful messages passed through mutual acquaintances and elaborate arrangements that felt more complex than any royal ceremony. Yet here she was, in the temple gardens where palm trees cast cooling shadows and the sound of flowing water masked quiet conversations. She had chosen this spot because it seemed neutral ground, neither the military quarter that belonged to his world, nor the artisan district that defined hers. The temple gardens welcomed all who came with honest hearts, and surely the gods would understand the innocent nature of their meeting. "You came." His deep voice startled her, despite her expectation, emerging from the shadows of a date palm grove like a gentle thunder. Neferet rose gracefully, brushing dust from her festival dress, her finest garment, woven with silver threads that caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the palm fronds. I said I would. Kermwaset appeared different away from the marketplace crowds and military formations, without his bronze armor and ceremonial weapons, dressed in simple linen that revealed the human man beneath the legendary warrior. He seemed less like a monument and more like a person carrying an unusually large burden of solitude. I was not certain, he admitted, settling carefully onto the stone bench beside the pool. Even seated, his height remained impressive, but his posture suggested weariness rather than dominance. Few people keep their word to soldiers, especially in matters that serve no practical purpose. What purpose does this serve? Neferet asked, taking her place on the bench with careful attention to proper distance between them. I do not know, Kermwaset replied with surprising honesty. I know only that our conversations in the marketplace have brought me more peace than I have felt in years. Perhaps that is purpose enough. The blue lotus drifted closer to where they sat, its perfect petals seeming to glow with inner light. Egyptian mythology held that such flowers were sacred to Ra, symbols of rebirth and the eternal cycle of death and renewal. Neferet plucked it carefully from the water, cradling its delicate beauty in her cupped palms. Tell me about your life before the army, she said softly. Were you always so tall? A shadow of old pain crossed his features. I have been different since childhood. My parents died when I was 7. Plague took them both, within days of each other. The relatives who took me in saw my size as either divine blessing or cursed burden, depending on their mood and my behavior. That must have been frightening for a child. Terror and loneliness were my constant companions until I was old enough to join the military. At least in the army, my differences became advantages rather than curiosities to be hidden or displayed. Neferet studied his profile as he spoke, noting the careful way he held himself, as if always conscious of taking up too much space in a world designed for smaller people. Do you ever regret choosing the soldier's path? I did not choose it so much as fall into it, Kermwaset said. But yes, sometimes I wonder what my life might have been if I had been born ordinary. If I could have learned a craft, married a woman who loved rather than feared me, raised children who saw their father as protector rather than oddity. The longing in his voice touched something deep in Neferet's heart. She had expected to discover ambition or ruthlessness beneath his warrior exterior, not this profound hunger for simple human connection. Without thinking, she reached out and placed the lotus flower in his massive palm. Perhaps the gods gave you extraordinary size because they intended you for extraordinary purposes, she said gently. Not just in war, but in peace as well. Kermwaset stared at the delicate flower resting in his huge hand, the contrast almost comical yet somehow deeply moving. You see possibilities where others see only problems. How do you maintain such faith in goodness? My father taught me that every piece of clay holds the potential for beauty, regardless of its initial appearance. The potter's skill lies not in choosing perfect materials, but in seeing what can be created from what exists. And what do you see when you look at me? He asked quietly. Neferet met his gaze directly, her heart racing at her own boldness. I see a man who carves toy birds for children, who apologizes for accidents that were not his fault, who speaks gently despite possessing the strength to command through fear. I see someone worthy of friendship, regardless of what others might think. The word friendship hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. The silver ankh pendant caught the moonlight as it rested against Neferet's throat, its sacred symbol of life gleaming like a fallen star. She touched it gently as she waited in the shadows of the abandoned shrine, her heart beating so loudly she feared it might alert any passing guards to her presence. 3 weeks of secret meetings had led to this moment, the night when Kemwasit would give her this precious gift, sealing their bond with something more than stolen conversations and careful glances. The shrine to Hathor had been forgotten by most of Memphis, its painted walls faded and its offerings altar cracked with age. But the goddess of love still seemed to watch over their clandestine encounters, her painted eyes following their movements with ancient wisdom and perhaps divine approval. "You are taking such risks," Kemwasit had whispered during their last meeting, his massive hands gentle as they traced the worry lines that had begun to appear on our eyes. "Your reputation, your family's standing, all could be destroyed if we are discovered." Yet here she was again, unable to resist the pull of his presence, despite the very real dangers their relationship represented. Each meeting had revealed new layers of the man beneath the warrior's exterior. She had learned about his childhood fears, his dreams of a simpler life, his unexpected knowledge of poetry and philosophy, gained during long campaigns when books were his only companions. Tonight felt different, charged with an intensity that made her skin tingle with anticipation. When Kemwasit emerged from the deeper shadows, his usual careful composure seemed strained, as if he struggled with emotions too powerful to contain. "I should not have asked you to come," he said without preamble, though he made no move to leave. "This grows more dangerous with each meeting." "Dangerous for whom?" Neferet asked, stepping closer, despite her own fears. "I am not some fragile flower that wilts at the first sign of difficulty." "No," he agreed, his voice rough with suppressed feeling. "You are strong and brave and more beautiful than the dawn over the Nile. That is precisely why this terrifies me." The admission hung between them like a confession at a priest's altar. Neferet felt her breath catch at the raw honesty in his words, at the way his dark eyes reflected moonlight, and something deeper that made her pulse race. "I brought you something," Kemwasit continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But giving it to you will change everything between us. Once given, it cannot be taken back." From beneath his cloak, he withdrew the silver ankh pendant, its polished surface gleaming with the work of master craftsmen. The symbol of life hung from a delicate silver chain, beautiful enough to grace a queen's throat, yet meaningful beyond mere ornament. "Kemwasit, I cannot accept such a valuable gift," Neferet protested, though her eyes remained fixed on the pendant's graceful lines. "People will ask questions I cannot answer." "Then wear it hidden," he said, stepping close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his massive frame. "Let it rest against your heart where only you will know it exists. Let it remind you that someone in this world values your life above all treasures." His hands were surprisingly steady as he fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers barely brushing her skin yet sending shivers through her entire being. The ankh settled into the hollow of her throat, like it had been crafted specifically for that purpose, its weight both comforting and thrilling. "Now I am truly compromised," Neferet whispered, but her tone carried wonder rather than regret. "We both are," Kemwasit replied. "The question is whether we face that compromise together or retreat to our separate worlds of safety." Before she could respond, he lowered his head and kissed her with a gentleness that belied his enormous strength. The kiss was everything their careful conversations had promised and more, tender yet passionate, forbidden yet somehow inevitable. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily, as if they had run great distances to reach this moment. "There can be no going back now," Neferet said, her fingers tracing the ankh pendant that marked her as his in ways that transcended social convention. "I would not go back, even if the gods themselves commanded it," Kemwasit replied. "Whatever comes next, we will face it knowing that this moment was worth any price." In the distance, temple bells began to ring the midnight hour, their bronze voices carrying across sleeping Memphis like a warning that their stolen time together was ending. Soon they would have to return to their separate worlds, he to the military barracks where questions grew more pointed with each passing day, she to the pottery workshop where her father's concerned glances revealed his growing suspicions. But for now they held each other in the shadow of Hathor's forgotten shrine, two hearts beating in dangerous synchronization. The royal seal ring pressed heavily against Kamosit's finger as he stood at attention before Captain Amenemheb, its golden surface bearing the cartouche of Pharaoh Ramesses II, like a weight of obligation that grew heavier with each passing moment. The captain's weathered face showed none of its usual paternal warmth as he paced the length of his private quarters, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat of approaching judgment. "Reports have reached me," Amenemheb said, without preamble, his voice carrying the cold authority of absolute command. "Disturbing reports about your conduct during off-duty hours." Kamossit maintained his rigid posture, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird seeking freedom. "I am prepared to answer any questions about my service to the Pharaoh, Captain. This is not about your military performance, which remains exemplary. This concerns your association with civilians of questionable appropriateness." Amenemheb stopped his pacing to fix Kamossit with a stare that seemed to penetrate his very soul. "Specifically, your repeated presence in the company of an artisan family from the pottery court." The words struck like physical blows, confirming Kamosit's worst fears. Their careful precautions had not been enough. Someone had been watching, reporting, building a case against him that could destroy not only his military career, but Nefert's reputation and her family's standing in the community. "The family in question has shown no disrespect to the crown or military," Kamossit said carefully. "My interactions with them have been entirely proper." "Proper?" Amenemheb's voice rose with rare anger. "You wear the ring of royal service, Kamossit. Your oath binds you to conduct that reflects honor upon Pharaoh and empire. Dallying with potters' daughters reflects neither honor nor wisdom." Meanwhile, across the city in the modest workshop that had sheltered 4 generations of artisans, Nefert faced her own confrontation with equal determination and greater fear. Her father sat at his painting bench, his usually gentle hands gripping a ceramic bowl with white-knuckled intensity, while her younger brother cowered in the corner, sensing the storm that had descended upon their previously peaceful home. "3 times this week you have been seen speaking with that giant soldier," Keti said, his voice heavy with disappointment rather than anger. "3 times you have put yourself and this family at risk for the sake of what? Curiosity, romance, foolish rebellion against the natural order." "He is a good man, father," Nefert replied, her chin raised in defiance, despite the trembling in her voice. "Gentle and kind, nothing like the monster people believe him to be. What he is matters less than what he represents," Keti said sadly. "A soldier of his rank belongs to the Pharaoh first, to his military brothers second, and to his own desires last of all. Even if his intentions toward you were honorable, which I do not question, he has no freedom to pursue them." The silver ankh pendant felt like a burning coal against her throat, hidden beneath her dress, but seeming to pulse with guilty heat. She touched it unconsciously, drawing strength from its presence, even as she recognized the danger it represented. "You speak of the natural order, father, but what is natural about denying 2 people the right to know each other's hearts? What divine law says that kindness must be separated by accident of birth?" Keti's expression softened slightly at his daughter's passionate words, but his resolve remained firm. "The laws that maintain peace in our society, daughter. The boundaries that allow each person to find contentment within their proper sphere. When those boundaries are crossed, chaos follows." Young Seneb ventured forward from his corner refuge. The carved wooden bird that Kamossit had given him clutched protectively in his small hands. "Must I return his gift, sister? It is the most beautiful thing I have ever owned." The question struck Nefert like a physical blow, revealing the full extent of how their secret relationship had already begun to affect innocent members of both families. Her brother's simple pleasure in the soldier's kindness would become another casualty if she continued down this impossible path. "Keep your bird, little brother," she said softly. "Some gifts are too precious to surrender, regardless of the complications they create." Keti heard the deeper meaning in her words and sighed with the weariness of a man who recognized that his daughter's heart had already traveled beyond his ability to guide or protect it. "Then we must prepare for the consequences," he said quietly, "because they will come, as surely as the Nile floods each year. And when they do, we will face them together, as family should. The healing herbs bundle lay spread across the stone floor of the abandoned granary, like an offering to forgotten gods. Neferet's hands moved with practiced skill as she cleaned the deep gash on Kermwaset's forearm, the wound acquired during a training accident that she suspected was less accidental than he claimed. The antiseptic sting of crushed garlic and honey filled the musty air, mixing with the scent of dried barley that still clung to the ancient storage chambers. "This is deeper than you led me to believe," she murmured, her voice echoing softly in the cavernous space. "You should have gone to the military physicians and explain how I acquired a sword cut during what was supposed to be a simple formation drill." Kermwaset winced as she applied pressure to stop the bleeding. Some questions invite answers that create more problems than the original injury. They had been meeting here for a week now, forced to abandon their previous locations after too many curious eyes had begun to notice their pattern. The old granary offered perfect concealment, abandoned since the construction of newer storage facilities, closer to the harbor, forgotten by everyone except the occasional beggar seeking shelter from rain. Neferet worked in concentrated silence, her healing knowledge gleaned from years of tending her family's minor injuries and watching the temple healers during religious festivals. Her touch was gentle but sure, revealing a competence that went far beyond her pottery skills. "Tell me what really happened," she said, as she began wrapping his arm with clean linen strips. "And do not insult my intelligence with another story about clumsy accidents." Kermwaset studied her face in the dim light filtering through cracks in the granary wall. The past month of forced separation had changed her, adding shadows beneath her eyes and a new weariness to her movements. Yet her courage remained undiminished, proven by her willingness to meet him despite the growing risks. "3 of my fellow soldiers decided to test whether the giant's legendary reflexes had been compromised by distraction," he said finally. "They chose a training exercise as cover for settling their curiosity. They deliberately tried to wound you." Neferet's hands stilled in their wrapping, her voice sharp with indignation. "They tried to teach me a lesson about maintaining proper focus on military duties rather than civilian entanglements. The wound was meant as warning, not serious injury." The casual way he described the attack only fueled Neferet's anger. "How can you speak so calmly about betrayal by men who should stand with you?" "Because anger changes nothing," Kermwaset replied gently. "They act from loyalty to military tradition and concern for unit cohesion. In their position, watching a comrade risk everything for an impossible relationship, I might make similar choices." Neferet secured the bandage with more force than strictly necessary, her movements sharp with suppressed emotion. "So you defend those who would harm you while accepting blame for following your heart. I accept responsibility for the consequences of my choices. Just as you do, despite the price your family pays for your association with me." The reference to her own struggles hit its mark. Her father's increasing frailty, brought on by stress and worry about their family's reputation, had become impossible to ignore. Young Senab no longer played freely with neighborhood children, sensing the whispered conversations that followed his appearances in local markets. Even their pottery sales had declined as former customers found reasons to purchase elsewhere. "Perhaps they are right," Neferet said quietly, not meeting his eyes as she gathered her healing supplies. "Perhaps we are being selfish, pursuing something that brings nothing but suffering to those we love." Kermwaset caught her hands gently, stilling their nervous activity. "Do you truly believe that? That what exists between us is mere selfishness?" She looked up at him then, seeing past his imposing size to the vulnerability he shared only with her. "I believe we are two people who found something precious in an impossible situation. But I also believe that love which destroys rather than nurtures may not be love at all. Then we must find a way to nurture rather than destroy." Kermwaset said firmly, "I will not accept that the gods would place such feeling in our hearts only to demand we abandon it. The gods also gave us wisdom to recognize when our desires conflict with our duties," Neferet replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "And they gave us courage to fight for what matters most." Kamwaset lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her healing fingers. Help me find a path that honors both love and responsibility. Help me prove that we can build something beautiful without destroying what already exists. Looking into his eyes, seeing the determination that had made him legendary on battlefields, now focused entirely on preserving their connection, Neferet felt her resolve weaken. Perhaps there was a way forward that she had not yet imagined. The ivory gaming pieces gleamed like polished bones in the lamplight, as Amenhotep arranged them across the Senate board with calculated precision. Each move had been planned in advance, part of a strategy as methodical as any military campaign. The wealthy merchant's son possessed neither Kamwaset's physical strength nor his battlefield prowess, but he understood the power of patience and proper positioning in games, both small and large. "Your move, honored Keti," Amenhotep said smoothly, gesturing toward the board that occupied the low table between them in the pottery workshop's main room. "Though I confess my mind wanders to more pleasant matters than mere game." Keti studied the board with the same careful attention he brought to his ceramic glazes, though both men understood that Senate was merely the excuse for this evening's true business. Amenhotep's visits had become increasingly frequent over the past month, always arriving with gifts of fine foods or rare pigments for the workshop, always departing with lingering glances toward the doorway where Neferet occasionally appeared. "Glyn plainly, young man," Keti said, moving his piece with deliberate slowness. "A potter appreciates direct conversation as much as straight lines in his work." Amenhotep smiled, revealing teeth as perfectly aligned as his gaming strategy. At 25, he possessed the smooth confidence that came from never having wanted for anything important: wealth, education, family connections, or social standing. His proposal represented security and respectability, everything a sensible father should desire for his daughter. "Very well, I wish to formally request your daughter's hand in marriage. My family is prepared to offer a bride price that would secure your workshop's future for generations, plus a dowry that would ensure Neferet's comfort throughout her life." The words hung in the air like incense from a temple altar, heavy with significance and impossible to ignore. From the corner where he pretended to play with his carved bird, young Seneb listened with wide eyes that darted frequently toward his sister's workspace. "Neferet is a woman of strong opinions," Keti replied carefully. "Have you discussed your intentions with her directly?" "I have observed her character and found it admirable. Her reputation for kindness and skill in domestic arts precedes her throughout the artisan quarter. What more conversation is needed when the practical benefits are so clear?" Keti's weathered hands paused in their movement toward the gaming board. "Perhaps you should ask her that question yourself." As if summoned by their conversation, Neferet emerged from the back room where she had been mixing glazes for tomorrow's firing. She wore a simple work dress, her hair covered with a linen scarf that failed to hide its lustrous darkness, and her hands showed the honest stains of her craft. To Amenhotep's calculating eye, she represented beauty that could be refined into elegance with proper guidance and resources. "Good evening, Neferet," he said, rising with practiced courtesy. "I was just discussing with your father my desire to know you better. Perhaps we might walk together tomorrow evening, with proper escort of course, and speak of our respective hopes for the future." Neferet's hands instinctively moved to the hidden silver ankh beneath her dress, its presence both comfort and accusation. She had known this moment would come, had seen it approaching in her father's increasingly worried glances and the neighbors' meaningful whispers. Amenhotep represented everything that social convention demanded she accept: security, respectability, a future free from scandal and uncertainty. "You honor me with your interest," she replied with careful politeness. "But I am not prepared to discuss marriage with anyone at present. My family requires my full attention during these difficult times." Amenhotep's smile never wavered, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise at her directness. Women of her class rarely refused such advantageous proposals without compelling reasons that usually involved prior commitments or family obligations. "Naturally, family comes first," he agreed smoothly. But surely a wise woman considers how marriage to the right husband might better serve her family's needs than continued bachelorhood. My resources could eliminate the financial pressures that currently burden your household. The implied criticism of their family's circumstances sparked anger that Nefert struggled to conceal. Amenhotep saw their pottery workshop as quaint poverty to be rescued rather than honest livelihood to be respected. His proposal offered elevation rather than partnership, salvation rather than love. "My family's honor has never required rescue," she said quietly, her voice carrying an edge that made even young Seneb look up from his toy with concern. "Of course not," Amenhotep replied quickly, recognizing his tactical error. "I meant only that prosperity shared is prosperity doubled. Two families united in mutual support achieve more than either could accomplish alone." Keti observed this exchange with growing understanding of his daughter's position. Her polite but firm resistance revealed depths of conviction that went beyond mere reluctance to marry. Something else held her heart, something that made Amenhotep's advantageous proposal feel like a cage rather than an opportunity. The golden cartouche tablet blazed like a captured sun in the morning light as the royal herald unrolled the papyrus bearing Pharaoh Ramesses II's personal seal. Khemessat knelt in the dust of the garrison courtyard, his massive frame dwarfing even the ceremonial platform from which official proclamations were read. While every soldier in Memphis formed ranks to witness whatever judgment their divine ruler had decreed. Captain Amenemheb stood rigid at attention, his weathered face betraying nothing of his thoughts as the herald's voice rang across the assembled troops with the authority of absolute power. The summons had arrived without warning, carrying none of the usual advance notice that preceded routine military ceremonies or standard promotions. By the will of Pharaoh Ramesses the Great, beloved of Ra, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the soldier Khemessat, son of unknown lineage, is commanded to present himself at the palace of Memphis for audience with the divine presence at the hour of noon on this day. The formal language carried undertones that every experienced soldier recognized. This was not invitation but imperial demand, not honor but investigation. Someone had carried tales to the highest levels of command, elevating a local disciplinary matter to the attention of Pharaoh himself. Khemessat rose slowly, his mind racing through possible explanations for this unprecedented summons. His military record remained spotless despite recent distractions. His loyalty to the crown had never wavered throughout 15 years of faithful service. Yet here he stood, commanded to account for himself before the living God, who ruled the greatest empire the world had ever known. "Prepare yourself appropriately," Captain Amenemheb said quietly, as the formation dispersed. "Whatever has reached Pharaoh's ears, face it with the dignity befitting a soldier of Egypt." The journey to the palace complex took less than an hour, but each step felt weighted with the gravity of approaching judgment. Khemessat had entered these gilded halls before, receiving decorations for battlefield valor and participating in ceremonies marking military victories. Today felt different, charged with an tension that made even the palace guards seem unusually alert to his presence. The throne room of Memphis Palace embodied the divine power of Egyptian kingship in every golden surface and precious stone. Columns carved from single blocks of granite supported a ceiling painted with scenes of cosmic triumph, while walls bore hieroglyphic accounts of Pharaoh's victories over Egypt's enemies. The throne itself seemed less furniture than altar, raised on 7 steps that symbolized the sacred stages between earth and heaven. Pharaoh Ramesses II occupied this throne with the casual authority of a man who had ruled for 47 years and conquered territories from Nubia to Syria. At 69, he remained imposing despite his advanced age, his presence filling the vast chamber with an energy that reduced even the mightiest warriors to awed silence. "Approach Khemessat of Memphis," the divine voice commanded, each word carrying weight that seemed to compress the very air. Khemessat advanced across polished stones that reflected his image like still water, each footstep echoing in the profound silence that surrounded Pharaoh's presence. He performed the ritual prostration with practiced precision, pressing his forehead to the cool marble while awaiting permission to rise. "We have heard interesting reports about your recent activities," Pharaoh continued, his tone revealing nothing of his intentions. "Tales of a giant soldier whose heart has been captured by a potter's daughter, whose devotion to duty has become complicated by matters of personal affection." The words struck like physical blows, confirming Camoset's worst fears while revealing the extent to which his private struggles had become public knowledge. Someone with access to the highest levels of authority had been watching, analyzing, reporting every detail of his impossible relationship with Neferet. "Rise and look upon your king," Pharaoh commanded. "We would see the face of this legendary warrior who has forgotten that his heart belongs first to Egypt." Camoset lifted his head slowly, meeting the penetrating gaze of the most powerful man in the known world. What he saw there surprised him. Not anger or condemnation, but something that might have been curiosity mixed with what could only be described as amusement. "Tell us truthfully," Pharaoh said, leaning forward slightly on his golden throne. "Is this woman worth the disruption she has caused to our military order? Does her beauty justify the concern it has created among your superiors?" The question hung in the perfumed air like incense from temple altars, carrying implications that could determine not only Camoset's fate, but Neferet's as well. The ancient genealogy scroll unrolled like a map of forgotten dynasties, as the royal scribe spread its yellowed papyrus across a marbled table that had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms. Hieroglyphic symbols marched in precise columns down its length, recording bloodlines that stretched back through centuries of Egyptian royal history, each cartouche marking another link in chains of divine descent that connected mortal pharaohs to the eternal gods. Pharaoh Ramesses II studied the document with the satisfaction of a master strategist, revealing his most carefully guarded secret. Kamwas remained frozen in respectful attention, his mind struggling to process implications that seemed to reshape everything he had believed about his identity and place in the world. "Your true name," Pharaoh announced with deliberate ceremony, "is Kamwaset Ankh-Fn Sekmat, son of Prince Amenhotep II, grandson of Pharaoh Amenhotep II, great-grandson of Thutmose III, conqueror of Asia." The words fell like thunderbolts into the throne room's profound silence. Kamwaset felt his knees weaken as the full meaning penetrated his consciousness. He was not the abandoned orphan he had always believed himself to be, not the nameless giant whose origins had been lost to plague and poverty. He was royal blood, descendant of the greatest pharaohs in Egyptian history, heir to a lineage that commanded respect throughout the known world. "Impossible," he whispered, the word escaping before he could recall it. "Nothing is impossible for those who possess the wisdom to plan beyond a single generation," Pharaoh replied with evident satisfaction. "Your grandfather Amenhotep II was my beloved brother, third son of our father Seti the Great. When civil war threatened during the early years of my reign, he chose exile rather than risk dividing the kingdom through competing claims to succession." The royal scribe moved his reed pointer along the genealogical lines, tracing connections that revealed a conspiracy of protection spanning decades. Prince Amenhotep II had fled to Memphis with his pregnant wife, living in disguise among the artisan classes, while his son, Kamwaset's father, grew to manhood without knowledge of his royal heritage. "The plague that claimed your parents was no accident of fate," Pharaoh continued, his voice carrying the weight of old sorrows. "Enemies of our house had discovered their location and moved to eliminate potential threats to my rule. Your parents died protecting the secret of your birth, ensuring you would survive to serve Egypt in ways they could never have imagined." Kamwaset's massive hands trembled as he absorbed the magnitude of this revelation. The loneliness and rejection that had defined his entire existence suddenly transformed from cruel fate to necessary protection. His imposing size, which had made him an outcast among ordinary people, revealed itself as inherited blessing from a bloodline that had produced some of Egypt's most formidable pharaohs. "Why tell me this now?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Why not let the secret remain buried with those who died to protect it?" Pharaoh's smile carried depths of political calculation that few mortals were privileged to witness. because Egypt faces new challenges that require new solutions. The old ways of managing noble bloodlines through arranged marriages and political alliances have served their purpose, but times change. We need leaders who understand both military excellence and the hearts of common people. The implications struck Khemweset like a revelation from the gods themselves. His attraction to Neferet, which had seemed like rebellion against natural order, suddenly appeared as something else entirely, the instinctive recognition of worthiness that royal blood carried like divine gift. "Your potter's daughter," Pharaoh continued, confirming Khemweset's growing understanding, "has proven herself worthy of noble attention through qualities that transcend accident of birth. Courage, wisdom, loyalty, beauty, these virtues deserve recognition regardless of their humble origin." "If you would approve our union?" Khemweset asked, scarcely daring to believe such fortune possible. "We would command it," Pharaoh corrected with imperial authority. "Let it be known throughout Memphis that Prince Khemweset Ankh-If-in-Sekhmet has chosen his bride according to his heart's wisdom rather than political convenience. Let all Egypt see that true nobility recognizes itself wherever it appears." The transformation from outcast soldier to royal prince felt like awakening from a lifetime of dreams into reality more fantastic than imagination could construct. Yet with this elevation came new responsibilities that dwarfed any burden Khemweset had previously carried. What of those who oppose such unprecedented elevation of common blood to royal status? He asked. "Opposition will exist," Pharaoh acknowledged pragmatically. "But opposition always exists to change, regardless of its wisdom or necessity. Your task will be to prove through action that merit matters more than ancestry, that Egypt grows stronger when talent is recognized regardless of its origin." The ceremonial marriage crown rested on its golden pedestal, like a constellation of earthbound stars, its intricate network of precious gems and delicate metalwork catching the lamplight from dozens of oil flames that illuminated the royal preparation chamber. Neferet stared at the magnificent headdress with a mixture of awe and disbelief, her mind still struggling to process the transformation that had swept through her life like the Nile's most powerful flood. 3 days had passed since Prince Khemweset, had appeared at her family's pottery workshop, accompanied by royal heralds bearing Pharaoh's formal decree. 3 days since her world had been turned completely upside down by revelations that seemed too fantastic for belief, yet were supported by the full authority of divine kingship. The crown of Princess Neferet Ankh-Ezenpa, announced the chief court seamstress, using the royal name that had been chosen to reflect Neferet's new status as beloved wife of a prince, crafted by the finest jewelers in Memphis, according to traditions stretching back to the first dynasties. The weight of gold and ceremony pressed down upon Neferet's shoulders as heavily as the crown would soon press upon her head. Around her, an army of royal attendants moved with practiced efficiency, transforming her from potter's daughter into princess through applications of cosmetics, jewelry, and garments that cost more than her family had earned in their entire lifetime. Her reflection in the polished bronze mirrors showed a stranger adorned in royal magnificence. The girl who had shaped clay vessels with patient hands seemed to have vanished, replaced by this glittering figure who barely resembled the person Khemweset had fallen in love with in Memphis's dusty marketplace. "You appear troubled, princess," observed Sinepti, the elderly woman who served as chief of royal household staff. "Surely the prospect of marrying Egypt's most celebrated warrior should bring joy rather than worry." "I fear I am not prepared for such elevation," Neferet admitted quietly. "Yesterday I was a simple artisan. Today I am expected to understand the complexities of royal protocol and court politics. What if I fail to live up to such expectations?" Sinepti's expression softened with maternal understanding. "Every royal bride faces such fears, child. The transition from private person to public figure challenges even those born to nobility. But you possess qualities that cannot be taught through protocol or purchased with gold." "What qualities are those?" "The same ones that attracted a prince's devotion despite every obstacle that separated your worlds. Courage, kindness, wisdom, integrity. These virtues shine more brightly than any crown jewel. Meanwhile, in the royal apartments that had been hastily prepared for his occupancy, Camosset faced his own struggle with transformation. The simple military quarters that had housed him for 15 years seemed like memories from another lifetime, as he stood surrounded by furnishings fit for pharaonic nobility. Captain Amenheb, now required to address his former subordinate as Your Highness, observed the proceedings with visible discomfort. The revelation of Camosset's royal blood had transformed their military relationship into something far more complex, requiring adjustments that challenged decades of established hierarchy. The men are struggling to understand these changes, Amenheb reported with characteristic directness. They respect your military leadership, but royal status creates distance that did not exist before. I remain the same person who fought beside them through countless campaigns, Camosset replied, though his voice carried uncertainty about his own words. Royal blood does not change my commitment to their welfare or Egypt's defense. Blood may not change, but circumstances do, Amenheb observed pragmatically. You now carry responsibilities that extend far beyond military command. Your actions affect not only soldiers under your command, but the stability of royal succession itself. The weight of such responsibility felt heavier than any bronze armor Camosset had ever worn into battle. His personal happiness with Neferet, which had seemed like the greatest prize imaginable, now appeared as merely one element in a much larger political equation that involved the future of Egyptian kingship. Have there been objections to the marriage announcement? He asked, some murmuring among court factions who prefer traditional alliances between established noble families. But Pharaoh's will brooks no open opposition, and your military reputation silences most potential critics. As evening approached and the final day before their wedding ceremony began, both bride and groom found themselves questioning whether their love could survive the transformation that had elevated them from impossible dreamers to royal reality. The barriers that had once separated them had been magically dissolved, but new challenges had emerged that neither had anticipated when they first met beside a broken water jar in Memphis's marketplace. Tomorrow would bring the most elaborate wedding ceremony in Egyptian memory, uniting not just two hearts, but two worlds in a celebration that would echo through history. The sacred marriage chalice gleamed like liquid gold in the morning sunlight that streamed through the great temple's clerestory windows, its surface engraved with hieroglyphs that invoked the eternal blessings of Hathor, goddess of love, and Plida, creator of all beauty. High priest Kamwas, sharing his name with the royal bridegroom, lifted the precious vessel with ceremonial reverence as Memphis's greatest temple filled with nobles, military commanders, and common citizens who had gathered to witness this unprecedented union. Prince Kamwaset stood at the altar in royal regalia that transformed him from the simple soldier most had known into a figure of genuine majesty. The gold collar across his massive shoulders, the ceremonial crook and flail crossed over his chest, and the uraeus serpent crowning his brow declared his divine heritage to all who witnessed this sacred ceremony. Yet his eyes remained fixed, not on the impressive crowd, but on the temple entrance where his bride would soon appear. The processional began with trumpet fanfares that echoed off the painted columns like voices of the gods themselves, announcing a moment of cosmic significance. Royal dancers moved in patterns as old as Egyptian civilization, their movements telling the story of creation and renewal that every marriage symbolized. Priests burned incense that filled the vast space with fragrances of myrrh and frankincense, creating an atmosphere that seemed to bridge the mortal world with divine realms. Then Neferet appeared at the temple entrance, and collective gasps arose from the assembled crowd. The ceremonial marriage crown transformed her into a vision of ethereal beauty, while her golden gown caught the light like captured sunbeams. Yet beneath all the royal magnificence, she remained recognizably the potter's daughter whose kindness had first captured a lonely soldier's heart. As she processed down the temple's central aisle, accompanied by young girls strewing lotus petals in her path, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some voices carried wonder at her transformation, others skepticism about elevating common blood to royal status. But when she reached the altar and stood beside Claire Morset, their obvious devotion silenced even the most determined critics. "Behold," proclaimed High Priest Claire Morset, in a voice that filled every corner of the temple, "two hearts that the gods have chosen to unite, despite all obstacles that mortals might place in their path. Let all Egypt witness that love, guided by divine wisdom, transcends the boundaries that men create." The ceremony proceeded according to rituals that had blessed royal marriages for thousands of years, each prayer and invocation connecting this moment to the eternal cycles of death and rebirth that governed both individual lives and cosmic order. When the sacred marriage chalice was presented, both bride and groom drank from its golden rim, symbolically sharing sustenance that would nourish their union throughout eternity. But as the high priest began the final blessing that would make them husband and wife in the eyes of gods and men, a commotion arose near the temple's entrance. Amenhotep, the wealthy merchant's son who had sought Nefert's hand in marriage, pushed through the crowd with several supporters, his face twisted with indignation that had been building since Pharaoh's unexpected decree. "This marriage is an abomination against natural order," he shouted, his voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence that followed his interruption. "Common blood should not be elevated above those born to nobility. The gods themselves must protest such violation of divine hierarchy." Guards moved immediately to restrain the protesters, but Khemwaset raised his hand to halt their intervention. His massive frame seemed to grow even larger as he stepped forward to face this challenge to his bride's honor with the controlled fury of a warrior prince who had defended Egypt's borders against far more dangerous enemies. "You speak of divine hierarchy while showing disrespect in the god's own house," Khemwaset said, his voice carrying deadly quiet that made even the boldest opponents step backward. "You claim knowledge of natural order while demonstrating ignorance of true nobility. What nobility exists in a potter's daughter?" Amenhotep demanded, though his voice had lost some of its initial confidence. "The nobility of courage that faces fear without flinching. The nobility of kindness that sees beyond surface appearances to recognize worth in unexpected places. The nobility of wisdom that builds rather than destroys." Each word fell like hammer blows, backed by the absolute authority of royal blood and military command. "These virtues shine more brightly than any accident of birth or inherited wealth." Nefert stepped forward to stand beside her prince, her presence transforming his anger into protective strength rather than destructive fury. "I thank you for your concern about my worthiness," she said to Amenhotep with dignity that would have graced any born princess. "But worth is measured by actions, not origins. Today I pledge to prove myself worthy of the trust Pharaoh and my husband have placed in me." The simple sincerity of her words accomplished what royal authority alone could not, shaming the protesters into silence. The twin baby anklets chimed like silver bells as Princess Nefert lifted her infant son from his cradle, the tiny golden ornaments catching the morning light that streamed through the windows of their royal apartments. Little Prince Amenhotep Keti, named to honor both his royal heritage and his maternal grandfather, gurgled contentedly in his mother's arms, while his twin sister Princess Nefert Sineb slept peacefully in the adjacent cradle, both children bearing the distinctive size that marked them as their father's offspring. 2 years had passed since the wedding that had transformed Memphis society's understanding of nobility and worth. The royal apartments that had once seemed impossibly grand to a potter's daughter now felt like home, filled with the comfortable chaos that came from raising twins who had inherited their father's impressive physical presence along with their mother's gentle temperament. Khemwaset entered the nursery still wearing his ceremonial armor from the morning's military review, his bronze breastplate reflecting the dancing light from the oil lamps that burned perpetually to ward off evil influences from his precious children. The sight of his family never failed to fill him with wonder at the strange path that had led him from lonely soldier to devoted husband and father. "How did the review proceed?" Nefert asked, settling into the carved chair where she nursed their children while conducting the daily business that came with her new status as royal patron of Memphis's artisan communities. "Well enough. The new recruits show promise, and the veterans have finally adjusted to addressing me as prince," rather than simple comrade in arms. Camwaset removed his helmet and set it carefully aside, his movements automatic after years of military discipline. Captain Amenemheb reports that morale remains high, despite the challenges of integrating traditional military hierarchy with royal protocol. Their conversation was interrupted by young Seneb's excited entry into the nursery, the boy now 13 and serving as royal page, while continuing his education under palace tutors. His carved wooden bird, still treasured after all these years, rode in his belt pouch as he delivered the daily reports that kept them connected to the artisan quarter, where they had both been born. "Sister, father sends his greetings along with news from the pottery workshop," he announced with the formal courtesy required by his new position. The commission for Pharaoh's new palace proceeds ahead of schedule, and the workers speak with pride about their connection to royal patronage. The transformation of Keti's modest pottery workshop into Memphis's premier source of royal ceramics represented one of the most visible changes their elevation had brought to the artisan community. Rather than abandoning her origins, Princess Neferet had used her influence to showcase the skills and artistry that flourished in Memphis's working quarters, creating opportunities that lifted entire families from poverty to prosperity. "And Amenhotep?" Camwaset asked quietly, referring to the merchant's son, whose opposition to their marriage had created a scandal that still occasionally surfaced in court gossip. "He departed Memphis last month for trading ventures in Punt," Seneb replied with diplomatic neutrality. "Father says his family seeks to rebuild their reputation through distance and time rather than continued confrontation." The exile was voluntary but complete, representing the final resolution of opposition that had threatened to divide Memphis society along lines of traditional privilege versus merit-based advancement. Amenhotep's departure had removed the last organized resistance to the changes their Meres had initiated. Princess Neferet rose and walked to the window that overlooked the royal gardens, where their children would someday play among flowering shrubs and shaded pools. The view encompassed not only the immediate palace grounds, but the broader vista of Memphis itself, the great temples, the bustling markets, the residential quarters where families like hers had lived for generations. "Do you ever wonder what our lives might have been if we had never met?" she asked, though her tone suggested contentment rather than regret. "Every day," Camwaset admitted, joining her at the window with their son cradled against his massive chest. "But wondering about alternate paths seems less important than appreciating the one we found together." Their reflection in the window glass showed the remarkable transformation time had wrought. The giant soldier who had once carved toy birds in loneliness, now holding his own child with infinite tenderness. The potter's daughter who had once feared stepping beyond her familiar world, now wearing royal jewelry with natural grace. Below them in the gardens, workers tended flowering bushes that would bloom in seasons to come, their patient labor ensuring beauty that future generations would inherit and enjoy. Like the marriage that had begun with broken pottery in a dusty marketplace, their love had grown into something that would outlast their own mortal lives, creating ripples of change that would influence Egyptian society for decades to come. The memorial stela stood tall and proud in Memphis's central square, its lawless granite surface bearing hieroglyphic inscriptions that would preserve their love story for future generations to read and remember. Princess Neferet traced the carved symbols with weathered fingers that had once shaped clay vessels and now wore golden rings, marking 30 years of royal marriage, her eyes lingering on the words that transformed their personal journey into public inspiration. Here is recorded the union of Prince Camwaset Ankef in Sekhmet and Princess Neferet Ankes in Pa. She read aloud to the gathered crowd of children who had come for the monument's dedication ceremony. "Let all who see this stone remember that true love recognizes worth beyond the boundaries that mortals create, and that courage to follow the heart's wisdom can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities." The children listened with the rapt attention that good stories always commanded, their young faces reflecting wonder at the tale of the giant soldier and the potter's daughter, whose impossible love had become one of Egypt's most celebrated romances. Among them stood her own grandchildren, tall like their grandfather, artistic like their grandmother, bearing the best qualities of both noble heritage and common wisdom. Prince Camwaset, now 58, and bearing the dignified silver hair that marked his years of service to both pharaoh and family, watched from the monument's base with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose life had exceeded his most ambitious dreams. His massive frame remained impressive despite the passage of time, though he moved now with the careful precision of age rather than the explosive power of youth. The ceremony drew to a close as the sun reached its zenith, casting shadows that transformed the stela into a sundial, marking not just the passage of hours, but the endurance of love that had weathered every challenge fate could devise. The assembled crowd began to disperse, carrying with them renewed faith in the possibility that hearts could triumph over circumstances when guided by genuine devotion. "Do you regret any of it?" Nefret asked as they walked together through the palace gardens, where their children and grandchildren played among the flowering bushes that had grown tall during their years of marriage. The struggles, the opposition, the transformation of everything we thought we knew about our lives. Khemosset considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had always characterized his approach to important matters. Around them, the sounds of family life created a gentle symphony: children's laughter, the splash of water from ornamental pools, the rustle of palm fronds in the evening breeze that carried the scent of jasmine and lotus blossom. "I regret only the years of loneliness before I found you," he said finally. "Every challenge we faced together, every obstacle we overcame, every moment of doubt we endured, all of it led to this garden, these children, this life we built from the foundation of a broken water jar, and two hearts, brave enough to see beyond appearances." Their reflection in the garden's central pool showed the passage of time in silver hair and lined faces, but also revealed the enduring connection that had sustained them through 3 decades of marriage. The giant soldier and the potter's daughter had become elder statesman and royal patron, their influence extending far beyond their personal happiness to touch countless lives throughout the kingdom. "The young people ask me for advice about love," Nefret observed with gentle humor, "as if we possessed some secret formula for creating happiness from impossible circumstances." "Perhaps we do," Khemosset replied, settling onto the marble bench where they often spent evenings watching sunset paint the Nile gold and crimson. "Perhaps the secret is simply believing that love deserves the courage to pursue it, regardless of the obstacles that seem to make it impossible." As darkness approached and oil lamps began to flicker throughout the palace grounds, they sat together in comfortable silence that spoke of shared understanding deeper than words. The memorial stela in the city square would preserve the facts of their story for historians and romantic dreamers, but the true legacy lived in the changed attitudes that made similar love stories possible for future generations. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and fresh challenges, as it always had throughout their remarkable journey together. But tonight belonged to reflection and gratitude, to the quiet satisfaction of hearts that had followed their wisdom despite every reason to abandon hope. In the distance, the Great Pyramids stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky like eternal monuments to human aspiration and divine possibility. Their love story would outlast empires and pharaohs, carved not just in stone but in the collective memory of a people who had learned that true nobility comes not from accident of birth, but from courage to love without limit.